New information emerges in the Madeleine McCann case, bringing clues that could change the course of this investigation. What was discovered, and how could this help solve one of the world's biggest criminal mysteries? Let's analyze the latest revelations. If you, like me, are fascinated by mysteries that defy logic and stories that few have the courage to tell, subscribe now and activate the notification bell. Here, every detail matters, and every video is a step closer to the truth everyone is seeking. On the night of May 3rd, 2007, Kate McCann went to the room where her children were sleeping. It was supposed to be a quiet night, just another dinner with friends during their holiday at the resort. But upon entering the room, the emptiness of Madeleine's bed hit her like a punch. The little girl, age 3, had disappeared, and in that moment, the McCann family's life changed forever. Now, years later, new information has come to light, offering a different perspective on what happened that night and the days that followed. One question remains: could everything we knew about the case up to now be wrong? Shortly after the disappearance, the initial investigation focused on the children's room and the surroundings of the resort in Praia da Luz, Portugal. The local police believed that Madeleine might have simply left on her own. However, as hours passed, witnesses began reporting disturbing details that were overlooked. One person saw a man carrying a blonde child down the street in the opposite direction of the resort. Another claimed to have heard strange sounds coming from a car parked nearby. But this information was only considered days later, a precious time that could never be recovered. Now, new evidence and reports raise more questions. One of the central points of these discoveries is the car used by Christian Bruckner, the most recent suspect linked to the case. He was a known criminal in the area with a troubling history that included crimes against children. His vehicle was seen near the location of the disappearance, and phone records show he was in the area that same night. But what really catches attention is the fact that he allegedly tried to sell the car shortly after Madeleine disappeared. Coincidence, or something visited is the room's window. At the time, the police initially dismissed the possibility that someone had entered through it, as there were no signs of forced entry. However, new analyses conducted by specialists indicate that the window could have been carefully manipulated to appear intact. This would change the entire original narrative, pointing to a planned crime rather than something impulsive. Witnesses from that time are also being reevaluated. One of them, a tourist staying at the same resort, claims to have seen a van parked for long periods at the location. He noticed that the van was always in a strategic position, with a clear view of the McCann apartment. At the time, no one paid attention to the report, but now it connects with another recent piece of evidence. A similar van was tracked in other locations where children disappeared under similar circumstances. Another point that cannot be ignored is the stance of the local authorities. During the first days of the investigation, the Portuguese police were widely criticized for not closing the borders quickly and for delaying the issuance of international alerts. Experts in kidnapping investigations point out that the first 48 hours are crucial for finding a missing child. In Madeleine's case, those hours were spent trying to understand what had really happened, while important clues dissipated. And then the big question arises: what changed in the investigation for these new clues to finally be considered? Part of the answer lies in technological advancements. Modern DNA analysis and security image software have made it possible to reevaluate evidence that previously did not yield concrete conclusions. For example, a piece of fabric found near the location of the disappearance, which had been dismissed as irrelevant, is now being re-examined. Moreover, with international pressure and renewed attention to the case, new witnesses decided to come forward. Some of them reported seeing strange movements from people who seemed to be observing the McCann family's routine days before the disappearance. One of these witnesses described a man of foreign appearance who asked questions about the resort's security. These pieces of information may seem small, but together they create a pattern that reinforces the idea that Madeleine was not a victim of random circumstances. With so many revelations, it becomes clear that the case is far from closed. With each new piece added to the puzzle, new questions and possibilities arise. But what do these clues really mean? Are they bringing us closer to the truth or creating more distractions in an already complex case? If there's one thing this case teaches us, it's that appearances can be deceiving. What seemed to be an unsolvable mystery is now taking on new contours. Each piece added to the puzzle reveals deeper connections, intertwined stories, and questions that still crave answers. But here's the real question: do these new clues really bring us closer to the truth, or are they just another chapter in a game of distractions? The more details emerge, the more the mystery seems to grow. But one thing is certain: we are closer to something big. And this leads us to another intriguing point. There are other disappearances in Europe that seem to follow a similar pattern. Is there a connection, or are we just witnessing frightening coincidences? This is a discussion worth delving into. Since the beginning of the Madeleine McCann case, many questions revolved around the night of the disappearance. However, a new line of investigation brought a disturbing detail to light. A witness reported seeing a man carrying a child through the village that same night, but his description does not match anyone who was officially in the area. And what else is striking? This same witness said that even in the low light, he managed to notice a very specific detail in the child's clothing. It was something that exactly matched the pajamas Kate McCann described Madeleine was wearing that night. This point raises the question, why was this man never identified? Was he just an ordinary passerby, or perhaps someone who knew exactly what he was doing? And then there are the phone call records from that night. In recent months, a detailed analysis showed that a mysterious number made calls before and after the disappearance. This number is not associated with anyone involved in the case, but the location where the call was registered is just a few meters from the apartment where Madeleine disappeared. How to explain this? Was the person just passing by or monitoring something? Reports of movements around the apartment are equally intriguing. While the McCanns dined at the tapas restaurant, neighbors claimed to have heard strange sounds coming from outside the building, but couldn't identify what they were. A window opening noise, hurried footsteps, maybe even a car when connected, paint a disturbing scenario. Now think about this. How is it possible that, in such a busy area with so many tourists and residents, no one saw anything other than the man with the child? Do other people know more than they said but chose not to get involved? Or is there a strategy to keep certain information hidden? What makes everything even more confusing are the inconsistencies in the testimonies. Some of the McCann's friends who were at the restaurant that night presented different versions of how they monitored the children's rooms. Some said they checked every half hour, others mentioned longer intervals. But what if this interval was exactly the window someone needed to act? And here comes a detail that few mention: the proximity of the apartment to the main street. The room where Madeleine slept had a low window with easy access for anyone outside. This has always been pointed out as an obvious risk, but there were no signs of forced entry. The window was open from the inside, something that raises a scary doubt. Did the person who entered the room have the confidence that they wouldn't be interrupted? Connecting all these points, an image begins to form, but it's still full of gaps. Who was the man with the child? What is his connection to the phone calls? Why was the surveillance of the room not sufficient? And above all, who could have wanted these pieces of information to remain hidden for so long? In the end, the latest clues in the case not only increase the mystery, but also raise a central question. Are we closer to finding the truth, or are these revelations part of something much bigger that we still cannot fully understand? Shortly after Madeleine's disappearance, one of the first theories that emerged involved a kidnapping attempt. But what seemed to be an isolated possibility quickly turned into a web of mysteries as details began to surface about the events of that night. An eyewitness reported seeing a man carrying a child with characteristics matching Madeleine near the apartment where she was. He seemed hurried, but the description was clear. The girl was barefoot and wearing something that appeared to be a light pajama. This account, initially treated as an important clue, was later dismissed. The reason? The police claimed he could have been confused with another guest or with a father returning home with his son. But here's the troubling point. If this was such a common scene, why did the witness insist there was something out of place about the man's behavior? Why did he seem to avoid eye contact and quickly move away from the area? Now, some new clues put this description under a new perspective. Recent investigations pointed out that a suspect, already known for illicit activities, was in the region around the same time and had a history of involvement in similar crimes. Even more unsettling, phone records indicate he was communicating with someone else in a location near the village moments before Madeleine disappeared. Who was this contact, and what were they planning? Details about Madeleine's room are also critical. The open window was seen as the possible point of entry or exit. However, something has always been strange in this narrative. The window's angle, combined with the apartment's height, would make a quick escape complicated. This raises the question, did whoever was there rely on external help? Someone waiting outside to facilitate taking the child away? And then there are the more controversial theories involving people close to the McCann family. Some point out that the movements within the group of friends that night were not fully explained. Why did some of them give inconsistent testimonies about who checked on the children and at what times? Were these discrepancies seen as memory lapses due to stress? or is something deeper being hidden? Another point gaining strength involves the role of the media. From the beginning, the massive attention to the case made it almost impossible to separate facts from speculation. While many clues were disclosed, others disappeared as quickly as they emerged. For example, the report that a car rented by the family months after the disappearance had biological traces of Madeleine was widely discussed and then minimized. How could something like that be disregarded? This is one of the mysteries that still haunt investigators and those curious about the case. And perhaps the most disturbing of all, recent investigations have revealed a possible connection between Madeleine and a human trafficking network active in various parts of Europe. Sniffer dogs used in the apartment detected odors indicating that something terrible might have happened there. But the lack of concrete evidence always prevented any definitive conclusion. Now, with these new clues, it is possible that a clearer line of investigation is finally emerging. We are faced with questions that seem to have dark answers. Who was the man seen that night? How did he manage to act so quickly, even with so many people in the area? Why were so many details, from phone records to contradictory reports, not thoroughly investigated at the time? And most importantly, are we really closer to discovering the truth, or are these recent clues just another fragment of a puzzle that still lacks many pieces? The new clues about Madeleine McCann's disappearance have shed a different light on the investigation, bringing to light information that was previously off the radar, or worse, neglected. When Madeleine's parents reported her disappearance that May night in 2007, they believed they were facing a kidnapping case. But over time, previously ignored or discredited details began to point to something much more complex. One of the most recent discoveries that intrigued investigators is the link of phone records between people who were close to Praia da Luz on the night of the disappearance. One number in particular caught attention. It belongs to an individual with a history of criminal activities in the area, including suspected involvement with human trafficking networks. Even more alarming, the calls coincide exactly with the period when Madeleine disappeared. Who was this person, and why had they never been thoroughly investigated before? Another curious point concerns the behavior of some guests and local residents that week. Reports indicate that strangers to the area were seen prowling the village, observing the apartments. Although these reports were recorded, many of them were dismissed by the police due to a lack of concrete evidence. Now, years later, witnesses are emerging who claim to have seen a vehicle with foreign plates parked in an unusual location near the McCann's apartment. The connection between this vehicle and the previously mentioned phone records could be the missing piece in this puzzle. But what might be most disconcerting is how evidence inside the apartment was handled at the time. Specialized sniffer dogs identified blood odors and biological traces at specific points in the room where Madeleine slept. Although these findings were widely publicized, the absence of conclusive analysis created a gap in the narrative. Now, specialists are re-evaluating this evidence with more advanced technologies, seeking answers that were previously unattainable. These recent discoveries have reignited an essential question. What if Madeleine never left the apartment on her own? What if someone who knew the family's routine details had planned everything precisely? This is where one of the most controversial aspects comes in, the possibility that the disappearance is related to organized networks. This theory, as shocking as it may seem, is not dismissed by investigators. Criminal groups specializing in international kidnappings are known to act quickly, choosing targets in tourist areas and disappearing without a trace. Praia da Luz, with its mix of tourists and local residents, offered the ideal environment for such a crime. Furthermore, there is something that has always sparked intense debates: Madeleine's parents' insistence on keeping the case in the spotlight. Many criticize them for this stance, but at the same time, this media focus was crucial for bringing to light information like these revelations now coming to the forefront. Without the constant pressure, it's possible that important details would have remained buried. And then we have the element that changes everything. A new witness who claims to have seen a girl very similar to Madeleine at an airport in another country weeks after the disappearance. This person described the child as scared and accompanied by two adults who appeared nervous. Although the police could not confirm the girl's identity, the report matches other information about possible human trafficking movements in the region at the time. The sum of all these factors raises an inevitable question. Are we finally approaching a concrete answer? Or are these new clues just another diversion in a case full of contradictions and possibilities? What is clear is that, after all these years, Madeleine's disappearance continues to challenge both investigators and public opinion. The Madeleine McCann case continues to defy investigations and our understandings, and the new clues only reinforce how every detail matters. What these discoveries show is that, even after so many years, there is still room for questions that need to be asked and answers that can finally change the course of this story. My opinion? It is impossible to ignore the contradictions and the potential negligence at crucial moments of the investigation. It seems clear that there were failures and, in some cases, even attempts to obscure the facts. But what really intrigues me is how these suspicious movements connect points that previously seemed scattered. Are we closer to the truth? Perhaps, but undoubtedly there are still many missing pieces in this puzzle. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these new pieces of information do you think could be the key to solving the case? If you've made it this far, comment, "I am part of the search for the truth," so I know you watched the video until the end. And speaking of searches for the truth, in the next video we will dive even deeper into another controversial issue linked to the Madeleine case. Don't miss it, because the revelations could be even more surprising. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss the upcoming content. And if you have suggestions for topics or cases you'd like to see here, leave them in the comments. Who knows, the next video might be about your suggestion. See you then.